Have you ever heard the story of the boogeyman? Not the kind your parents warned you about when you refused to sleep, not the kind lurking under your bed or inside your closet. I'm talking about a monster that was real, a monster that walked the same streets you did, that breathed the same air, and stole children from their homes, leaving their families broken forever. On Staten Island, New York, in the 1970s, parents whispered one name at night to keep their kids from wandering too far. A name that slipped off tongues like poison, Cropsey. At first, Cropsey was just a tale told around campfires. A maniac escaped from a mental asylum, hiding in the woods with a rusty hook for a hand, waiting to drag children into the shadows. The story spread through neighborhoods and schools. Kids dared each other to go near the abandoned Willowbrook State School, a crumbling institution rumored to house him. Teachers laughed it off, parents rolled their eyes. But behind closed doors, everyone felt it. The fear was too real, too specific. And then, children began to vanish. It started small, the kind of thing police dismissed as runaways. Staten Island was changing in those years. Poverty, drugs, families breaking apart. Kids sometimes left on their own, and the city swallowed them. But as the disappearances grew, people started connecting the dots. The missing kids all lived near the same places: wooded lots, abandoned houses, the ruins of Willowbrook. Parents stopped letting their children play outside. Cops combed the forests, finding strange campsites, filthy mattresses, burned cans, rotting food, but no one ever saw the man who left them. No one ever caught him, just shadows, just whispers. The boogeyman story was coming true. There's one family I'll never forget, the Ram family. Their little girl, Jennifer, was just 12 years old. Sweet, shy, the kind of kid who carried books instead of toys. One summer evening in 1981, she never came home. She was walking to a friend's house just 2 blocks away. She never made it. By the time police got involved, the trail was already cold. Witnesses said they saw a man with a limp hanging around the block that afternoon. He was tall, broad, with dark, sunken eyes. His name was whispered by neighbors like a curse. Andre Rand. He had worked at Willowbrook State School years before. When the school shut down due to horrific abuse scandals, he didn't leave. People said he lived in the tunnels underneath the asylum, scuttling like a rat through the ruins. Some said he kidnapped children for satanic cults. Others believed he killed them himself, offering their bodies to something older, something darker, hiding in those woods. Jennifer's body was never found. She wasn't the only one. Over the years, more children disappeared. Some were mentally disabled, others just unfortunate enough to cross paths with the wrong man. Each case was swallowed in silence. Parents left screaming at the walls, while the rest of Staten Island buried the stories. But if you go there now, if you stand in the ruins of Willowbrook, you can feel it. The silence is heavy. The air doesn't move. Some say Cropsey is still there, waiting, because here's the truth. Cropsey wasn't just an urban legend. He was real. And the most terrifying part? Monsters like him never really die. By the time the whispers of Cropsey spread through Staten Island, Willowbrook State School was already a stain on the city's conscience. On the surface, it was built to care for children with developmental disabilities. But behind the locked gates and rusted bars, it was hell. Parents who trusted the system later described the inside as a nightmare. Children left unclothed, filthy, smeared in their own waste, rocking back and forth in overcrowded rooms. They were beaten, drugged, restrained. The hallways smelled of rot and despair. In 1972, journalist Geraldo Rivera broke in with a camera crew. His report shocked the nation rooms filled with screaming, neglected kids, hundreds crammed into spaces meant for dozens. That was the day Willowbrook's secrets spilled into the light. And it was the day the Cropsey legend began to evolve. When the state finally shut Willowbrook down, it didn't die. The building stood, abandoned, its windows shattered, its corridors hollow and wet with mildew. Locals claim the tunnels underneath stretched for miles, labyrinths of darkness no sane person dared enter. But someone did. After the school closed, Andre Rand stayed behind. He was a drifter, a man with a criminal past, and whispers claimed he knew every inch of those tunnels. Some said he made camps in the woods nearby. Others swore they saw him dragging a cart through the brush, muttering to himself, his eyes darting like a cornered animal. Parents told their kids to stay far away, but children don't always listen. The first to vanish was little Alice Pereira, just 5 years old. It was 1972, the same year Willowbrook shut down. She wandered away from her yard one afternoon and was never seen again. Police searched, neighbors searched, but her name faded into silence. Then came Holly Hughes, a 10-year-old who went missing in 1981. She had argued with her mother that night and stormed off toward a friend's house. She never arrived. Witnesses reported a strange man offering candy to kids near the block, a man with a limp, a man whose eyes seemed empty. Her face, like Alice's, ended up on posters taped to light poles and diner walls. Another family broken, another child stolen. People were terrified, but still the police hesitated. Without bodies, without clear evidence, they chalked it up to coincidence. But parents knew. They locked doors, clutched their kids' hands tighter, and warned them of Cropsey. The legend that had started as campfire fun was now a living terror. And then there was Jennifer Schweiger. Jennifer was 12 years old, a girl with Down syndrome, trusting and gentle. On July 9th, 1987, she went for a walk around the block. It should have been safe. Neighbors saw her strolling near the old Willowbrook grounds, smiling to herself. That was the last time anyone saw her alive. The entire community exploded in panic. Hundreds of volunteers searched day and night. Parents carried flashlights into the woods, calling her name, praying for a miracle. But the deeper they went, the more they felt it, that sensation of being watched, of something lurking in the shadows, retreating just out of sight. For 35 days, the search continued. Then, in a shallow grave near Willowbrook, Jennifer's body was found. Her small hands were folded across her chest. Her death silenced Staten Island. The police had their suspect. Andre Rand, the drifter, the shadow in the woods, was arrested. He had a history of child abduction. He had been seen with Jennifer the day she disappeared. His campsite, just a stone's throw from her grave, reeked of rot. But still, the legend only grew darker, because whispers spread that Rand wasn't working alone, that he was delivering children to something worse. Satanic cults, rituals in the tunnels beneath Willowbrook, children's cries echoing through the walls at night. Police never confirmed those stories. But the parents, the volunteers, the ones who wandered through those woods, they swore the air was thick with evil. And here's the part that haunts me. Even after Rand was arrested, the stories didn't stop. Kids swore they saw a figure watching them from the trees. Parents heard knocking on their doors late at night, only to open them and find no one there. Cropsey had become more than just Andre Rand. He had become a presence. An idea, a curse sown into Staten Island soil. Because even when the man is gone, the boogeyman stays. The trial of Andre Rand should have brought Staten Island peace. After all, the community had lived in fear for more than a decade. Children had vanished, parents had buried their hopes, and the name Cropsey had transformed from a campfire tale into a living horror. But when Rand was finally dragged into court, there was no peace, only more questions. The prosecutors struggled. There was no clear evidence linking him to Jennifer Schweiger's death. No DNA, no fingerprints, no smoking gun, only witness statements and his history. Rand had already been arrested in the 1960s for attempted child abductions. He'd been caught luring kids into his van, offering candy, promising rides home. and everyone knew he lived like a ghost near Willowbrook, lurking in the shadows of its ruins. But the jury couldn't shake it. The image of Jennifer's body, found in the shallow earth not far from where Rand slept. It was enough. In 1988, he was convicted of kidnapping and given a sentence of 25 years to life. Parents cheered. Reporters filled headlines. Staten Island breathed again, but not for long. Because here's where things take a turn into something darker. During the investigation, police uncovered chilling rumors they never confirmed publicly, but which spread like wildfire among locals. Volunteers searching the woods had stumbled upon bizarre altars, circles of candles, broken dolls arranged in patterns, scraps of children's clothing burned and buried. And in the tunnels beneath Willowbrook, graffiti covered the walls' pentagrams, cryptic messages, dates scrawled in red paint. Some of the dates matched the disappearances. Police dismissed it as coincidence, teenagers playing games, but those who ventured into the tunnels knew better. They described hearing whispers echoing in the dark when no one else was near, cold gusts of air rushing past them in the stillness, and sometimes, far in the distance, the sound of a child crying. The idea began to spread. Rand hadn't been working alone. Staten Island had long whispered about a cult operating in the shadows and underground, group tied to ritual sacrifices and satanic rites. The 1980s were drenched in what the media called the satanic panic. Across America, rumors of cults abducting children, of ritual abuse, of blood offerings, filled nightly news reports. And in Staten Island, where children really were disappearing, those whispers cut too deep to ignore. Some believed Rand was the cult's servant, delivering children into the tunnels for sacrifices. Others claimed he was part of something even older, a local curse tied to the land itself. That Willowbrook wasn't just a school, it was a feeding ground. The most disturbing part? Some of the missing children were never found. Their families never had closure. No graves. No bodies. Just names fading from posters in grocery stores and telephone poles. Rand was locked away, but parents still swore they felt watched. The woods near Willowbrook remained off-limits, haunted by more than just memory. Kids dared each other to enter the tunnels, but those who did often came back pale, shaken, refusing to speak of what they saw. I remember one story in particular. A group of teenagers snuck into the tunnels one summer night. They carried flashlights, laughing, mocking the Cropsey legend. But the deeper they went, the quieter they became. The walls narrowed, the air grew thick with mildew. Their beams caught rusted hospital beds, broken wheelchairs, piles of abandoned files scattered across the floor. And then they heard it scraping, slow, deliberate scraping against the concrete. When their flashlights swung around, the tunnel was empty. But the sound kept following them, echoing closer with every step. By the time they scrambled back into the night air, their laughter was gone. One swore he felt a hand brush the back of his neck in the dark. Another said she saw a tall figure, hunched and limping, lingering just beyond the edge of their light. They never went back. And that's why, even today, years after Rand's conviction, Staten Island still whispers about Cropsey. Because Rand was just a man. He could be locked away, forgotten, but Cropsey was bigger than him. Cropsey was the shadow that lingered in those tunnels, the name children whispered with trembling lips, the curse that clung to Willowbrook. The police closed their files, the reporters moved on, but parents knew better. Something was still out there. Something that didn't stop with Andre Rand. After Rand's conviction, Staten Island wanted to move on. Parents tried to convince themselves the nightmare was over, that the children were finally safe. But Cropsey had become something more than a man in handcuffs, and Staten Island knew it. In the years after, strange stories kept surfacing. People claimed to see figures lurking near the Willowbrook ruins tall, hunched shapes with limps, dragging their feet through the underbrush. A man who looked like Rand, even though Rand was rotting in prison. One mother swore she saw someone standing across the street from her house just after midnight. A tall shadow with a long coat watching her through the window. When she ran outside, it was gone. The next morning, she found footprints in the dirt beneath her daughter's window. The police didn't want to hear it. They said Staten Island was imagining ghosts. But the families who had lost children never stopped believing that something darker was still out there. And Willowbrook itself seemed alive. After the school closed, the grounds became a magnet for the desperate and the dangerous. Squatters, addicts, criminals, they all found shelter inside the rotting halls. The tunnels became their kingdom. Teenagers dared each other to go down, to touch the walls smeared with soot, to spray their names over graffiti that looked less like art and more like warnings. But people whispered about others who went down and never came back. There was a boy named Tommy who bragged he de-walked the tunnels all the way to the river. He left with 2 flashlights and 3 friends. Only 2 came out. They claimed Tommy had wandered too far ahead, his light bobbing in the distance. Then they heard him scream one long, piercing scream that cut off suddenly. When they rushed after him, all they found was his flashlight lying in a puddle, still burning. The police searched. They found nothing. Tommy was never seen again. Another night, a group of local kids described hearing chanting deep inside the tunnels. They swore it wasn't English. It was guttural, harsh, the sound of voices layered over each other. They turned and ran, but as they scrambled toward the exit, a rock came flying out of the dark, shattering against the wall inches from one boy's head. Who threw it? No one ever knew. And always, the parents of the missing whispered the same thing. Rand didn't act alone. Some of them believed a cult was involved. In the 1980s and 90s, whispers of satanic groups sacrificing children spread across America. On Staten Island, the rumors fit too perfectly. Candle wax was found in the tunnels. Dolls burned black, left in circles. One volunteer swore she found a small child's shoe, charred and covered in something that looked like dried blood. The newspapers laughed it off. Urban legends, they said. Teenagers trying to scare each other, but those families who had stared at empty beds at night, who had walked past untouched toys and clothes folded away forever, they didn't laugh, because they knew the legend of Cropsey was never just a story. It had become a living curse. And even locked away, Rand seemed to feed it. In prison, he barely spoke. When reporters came, he sneered, muttered nonsense, refused to answer questions. But one guard swore that Rand often scratched symbols into the walls of his cell. Symbols that looked exactly like the ones volunteers described deep in the tunnels. No one could explain how he knew. And yet, even with him behind bars, children whispered about Cropsey in hushed tones. They claimed if you said his name 3 times at night, you'd hear knocking at your window. Some said you'd see a face pressed against the glass sunken eyes, hollow cheeks, lips pulled back in a crooked smile. Teachers dismissed it. Parents rolled their eyes. But the story spread. And on Staten Island, when the sun dipped behind the trees and the shadows grew long, no one dared to go near Willowbrook, because the legend had taken root. Cropsey was no longer just Andre Rand. He was the echo of every missing child. The curse of Willowbrook, the figure waiting in the dark. And he wasn't finished. By the early 2000s, the legend of Cropsey had spread beyond Staten Island. What started as a local campfire story had crawled into the national spotlight, fueled by whispers, missing children, and the shadow of Willowbrook. But the most terrifying part wasn't the past, it was the way Cropsey refused to die. In 2009, 2 Staten Island filmmakers released a documentary simply titled Cropsey. They had grown up with the legend, dared each other to walk near the Willowbrook woods, and now, as adults, they wanted answers. Their cameras followed the trail of missing children, the rumors of satanic cults, and the shadow of Andre Rand, The documentary confirmed what locals had always known. The line between legend and reality was razor thin. Yes, Rand was real. Yes, children had vanished. Yes, Jennifer's body was found in shallow earth. But beyond that, everything grew murky. Too many stories. Too many whispers. Too much fear to dismiss. And something in that film, something about dragging the legend into the light, seemed to stir it awake again. Urban explorers began sneaking into the ruins of Willowbrook. They filmed themselves wandering along corridors, their flashlights trembling across graffiti-covered walls. They laughed nervously at first, joking about Cropsey, daring him to show himself, but the laughter always faded. The silence in those tunnels was unbearable, heavy, like the air itself was watching. One video showed a group of friends turning a corner and finding a chair in the middle of the hallway. On it sat a child's doll, head missing, arms burned black. Their voices shook as they filmed it, and when one of them touched the doll, the camera caught a sound faint, almost impossible to hear. A child's giggle. They ran. Another explorer uploaded footage of strange symbols on the walls, painted in red. He joked it was spray paint, but in the last seconds of his video, when the camera panned too quickly, a figure seemed to flicker in the corner of the frame, a tall shadow, hunched, standing just at the edge of the light. The explorer never uploaded again. Meanwhile, Staten Island families reported strange encounters even far from Willowbrook. A mother claimed her son woke up screaming, saying a man with a limp had stood in his room, whispering his name. A father found his daughter sleepwalking one night, heading toward the woods with her arms outstretched, as if being led by an unseen hand. Police dismissed the stories. The legend, they said, was feeding paranoia, but legends don't leave footprints. And yet, people kept finding them, dragging footsteps in the mud, leading nowhere. And then there was the most chilling case. In 2013, a group of kids disappeared for nearly 12 hours. They were found the next morning, huddled in a drainage pipe not far from Willowbrook, shivering, their eyes wide with terror. When asked what happened, all they said was, "We followed the man. The police never found him." It was as if Cropsey himself had risen out of the story, no longer bound to the name of Andre Rand. The boogeyman had taken on a life of his own. Parents once again warned their children not to wander after dark. Kids once again whispered his name at sleepovers, daring each other to speak it 3 times. And Staten Island once again was haunted, because legends don't die. They wait, they grow, they sink into the soil, into the bricks of abandoned schools, into the tunnels carved deep underground. And Cropsey had sunk in too deep to ever leave. The question wasn't whether he was real. The question was how much of him was man, and how much of him was something else. The courtroom was packed, every seat filled, the air heavy with whispers and judgment. Andre Rand sat there, a hollow shell of a man, his sunken eyes staring at nothing, his greasy hair falling in strands around his pale face. Some said he looked like the very monster the children in Staten Island had feared for decades. Others said he looked pathetic, a man broken by his own madness. The trial dragged on for weeks. Parents sat with photographs of their missing children pressed against their chests, waiting for answers that would never come. Witnesses stepped forward, former colleagues from Willowbrook who recalled his disturbing behavior, drifters who claimed to have seen him leading children into the woods. A handful of survivors who said he had tried to lure them, once promising candy or a ride home. But there were no bodies. That was the part that gnawed at the families most. Without remains, all they had were shadows, whispers, and the unbearable possibility that their children were still out there, somewhere in the dark earth of Staten Island, waiting to be found. The jury deliberated for days. When they returned, the room fell silent. Guilty, kidnapping, guilty, conspiracy. The gavel struck like thunder, but it didn't bring peace. It couldn't. The families wept, but their tears weren't of relief. They were tears of exhaustion, of anger, of grief that had no place to go. Rand was sentenced to decades in prison, where he would eventually rot. But Staten Island never forgot him. Even after Rand was locked away, the woods held their secrets. Local kids dared each other to go to the ruins of Willowbrook at night. They claimed they heard the sound of children crying in the dark halls, or saw a man's shadow moving just out of reach of their flashlights. Parents still warned their children, don't wander too far. Don't trust strangers. Cropsey might still be out there. And maybe, in some ways, he was. Not Rand himself, but the idea of him, the monster in the dark, the proof that sometimes urban legends don't stay legends. Sometimes they crawl out of the shadows and steal away the innocent, leaving only whispers behind. Years later, a documentary would drag his story into the light, showing the world how Staten Island's boogeyman had been real all along. But for the families, for the ones who never got their children back, it wasn't just a story for film or folklore. It was a wound that never healed. And so the tale of Cropsey lived on, half truth, half nightmare. Some say if you walk near Willowbrook at night, you can still hear the rustle of footsteps in the weeds or see a gaunt figure slipping between the trees. Others claim it's just kids trying to scare each other, but every legend starts somewhere. Every monster is born from something real. And on Staten Island, in the shadows of the woods, the line between story and reality will forever remain blurred. Because Cropsey wasn't just a bedtime story, he was real. He walked those streets. He took children by the hand. And if you listen closely, the echoes of his presence are still there waiting for the next child who doesn't come home.